Hello, world. Welcome to Chats with Baba. Baba is a term used to describe elders or grandparents. So I've reached a point in my life where I've become an elder, and my children, my grandchildren refer to me as Baba Jim. The purpose of this podcast, brought to you by Lighthouse for Academic and Cultural Excellence, is to inform and empower parents of young Black children. Parents, you are their first and foremost teacher. And this podcast is to enable you to release the natural genius that's in our children. Our children have untapped and undeveloped gifts. And what makes a difference is the quality of experience and exposure that really lays the foundation for their life. We want to move from a book written by Carter G. Woodson, From Miseducation to Education. We want to strive for excellence. Last week's podcast and last week's newsletter dealt with some of our concerns or my concerns in terms of what we're communicating to our children. And I addressed the issue of fear of failure. Some of our own shortcomings we often transfer to our children. And we don't want to do that. We want to offer them the best that we possibly can. We owe it to them, and we want to teach them the best of our ability. And to this end, we must be intentional. We want to teach our children how to be students. And that begins at a very early age. We owe it to our children. And the other piece is we have the human capital to do that. And I will often make references to some of the things that I said in the past, just as a matter of reinforcement. My late friend and well-known renowned scholar, Asa Hilliard, says, there's only two things that we have to do with our children, whether you're their parent as a teacher, whether you're the teacher in the classroom. That is love them and treat them like human beings. All else will fall into place. So today, what I want to talk about is a couple of things as it relates to unlocking that genius. I want to begin by telling a story. When I was running a Saturday academy at this particular high school, there was a young man there who had dropped out and was working at one of the downtown hotels. And he was at level 1, dishwasher in a hotel. He could not get promoted to level 2 because he couldn't read. Dishwashing back in the old days was in the hotel, I'm telling you from experience, it was a matter of having 2 tubs of water, 3 tubs. You had hot water to soak them in, hot water and detergent to wash them, and the 3rd tub to rinse them, and they dried. In today's world, everything is technologically driven. He could not read what the gauges were asking of him, nor could he read and comprehend how much liquid soap he should put in and how to set the gauges according to how much time, etc. Well, he came back to the high school that he dropped out of and asked the principal if he could come back in. He had an issue with reading. Well, by now he's overage to come back into school, but the principal said to him, I want you to meet Dr. Young, who runs an academy on the weekend for our children. A fine young man. If anyone saw him and just made some perspective of what he was capable of doing, you say, wow, he looks very athletic, etc. So as we were introduced, I asked him, I said, well, what is your issue? He said, I can't read. He had some reading, some level of reading proficiency, but relatively low. So I asked him, I said, do you want to learn to read? He said, yes, sir. I said, you have anything that prevents you from wanting to read? He said, no, sir. I said, well, you meet all of the conditions to read. He said, what do you mean? I said, you're halfway home. Half of the battle of reading is the desire and wanting to read. Okay. Half of the battle is the desire to want to read. And the rest is a matter of teaching. So I said to him, I said, okay, I'm going to have you reading in a short period of time. I said, because you meet all the conditions, you want to read and you're motivated to read. You have aspirations of wanting to move beyond just being a dishwasher. So therefore, you are inspired to do what is necessary. And the other thing that I'm picking up from you is that you have the determination. So you're motivated, you're inspired, you have the determination. What he needed at this point was affirmation. I said, you can learn to read, and I'm going to help you to get there. So those four things: motivation, affirmation, inspiration, and determination are things that you want to instill in your children. You want to motivate them. You want to give them aspirations to dream big and help them to have the determination. And your task is to affirm them as you are doing this. So this young man, I said, I want to give you some word exercises. And every time I see you, I want to see you with a newspaper working on these word exercises. So lo and behold, in a matter of 6 weeks, we had him reading. I mean, he went home every day and put in the time. He did diligence to become a reader. Not only to become a reader, but to be able to read with understanding and comprehension. And we'll talk about those things later. So I think it's important to echo those things relative to teaching our children. And there's another story about a young man as a classroom teacher. When I walked into my first class ever, I looked around and there were 39 students. Okay, this was my encounter with teaching 39 students. Now there was one young male sitting in a sea of white faces, and I did not know him, but I wanted to get to know him. So as I called the roll, eventually when his name came up, he came to my desk and I talked to him and said to him, I expect you to be the smartest student in my class. And I said, so with that expectation, he beamed, he glowed, and eventually walked away. And I said, what I shared with you is something that must stay between us. So all of that is to say this. As a community, I think we have to save our children. If we don't save them, they will cease to exist. We can turn the tide. We can create and unlock the genius in our children. We have the human capital. We don't need anyone's permission to do that. All we have to do is to be intentional about teaching our children. All children have a thirst for knowledge, for wanting to learn. And I often share with my students stories about Tiger Woods, stories about the Williams sisters, the great tennis players, and a story about, I think it's Cindy Copeland. Cindy was a dancer, one of the top ballet dancers in the country today. She didn't have the resources, and she was told she didn't have the body of a dancer. Tiger Woods' father said, I want to assure you that if you beat them at their game, you will gain their respect. So what I'm saying is that if we instill in our children that desire to want to learn, and if we as parents are intentional, they will learn. There's nothing short of genius that will come out of them by what you do for them in the process of parenting. And at the same time you're doing this, you're also helping them to develop a healthy sense of character. You're also helping them to develop a healthy sense of self-esteem. I think it's also important that we're aware of the kinds of things that we expose them to. And that is, if with young children, toys and other things that they play with and learn from should have some resemblance to the child, because what's being developed here is a sense of self, a sense of perception, and on and on and on. So we want to provide them with those kinds of things that they can relate to. So the teaching process, the teaching of our children is a process. Do you have to be an expert at it? No, but what you do has to be intentional, so that when we're teaching our children well. Now, as they move from the stage of infancy into toddlerhood, into preschoolers, there are some things that we want to assure them of as they begin to become proficient in their language. You know, as I said, Asa said, treat them like human beings and love them. 4 items that I've spoken to before, but I just want to reinforce them here. That is, teach them to pay attention, teach them to listen, teach them to follow directions, teach them how to start a task and finish a task. Those are 4 functional things that will do them well as they get to the point of moving into more formalized learning. So all of that is to unlock and cultivate the natural genius that's in them: listening, paying attention, following directions, learning to start and finish a task. I want to go back and make a correction. It's Misty Copeland, not Cindy Copeland. And these are examples or models that you can share with the children as you are teaching them. I think it's also important that in this process of doing this, the question that keeps coming to mind for me as an elder is preparation for the future. What are the challenges that you face as a parent? What is the hope and aspirations for your children as you continue to socialize them? There are some things I think it's critical that as they are developing, moving through the various stages, and that is from the early childhood to primary grades to elementary grades to middle school to high school, that we want to teach them, and so that what they know becomes part of their cultural and knowledge capital, if you will. We want to teach them about the world that they live in. We want them to have a sense of how that world is going to treat them. I mean, it doesn't have to be all the negative stuff that comes at them, but some sense of reality. We want them to have a sense of their identity, who they are, some sense of their ancestors, some sense of the generation that they're in and the previous generation, some sense of belonging to a people and part of an ethnic group and part of a family structure. We want them to also have a sense of purpose and what that means. We want to provide them with information and experiences that pertains to the richness of their ethnic background. All of this helps them to develop a sense of who they are. We also want to teach them a sense of responsibility and what they must do and how they act on certain things, and how all of this is going to eventually contribute to their own development and understanding. It's important that you are especially with the young children, parents, that you constantly read to them and help them to develop a healthy attitude about the whole notion of wanting to read and learn. Reading is it's a rather complex process, but let me try to simplify it by saying in children's stories, they have a beginning, a middle, and an end. They have events, they have characters, they have activities, and they have things that the characters engage themselves in or are doing. And part of your reading is helping them to understand all of what's happening in the stories. And there's a sequence of things as they unfold, and you're asking them questions. You may not always have the answers, but that's not critical at this point. But you want them to have a sense of understanding of where story, there's a beginning, there's a middle, and an end, and use those terms so that they understand the concept of sequencing. What comes first, what comes second, what comes third. There's a sense of order. All of this may not seem to make sense to you and or them at the point, but as they are unfolding, as they are developing thinking skills, the sense of order, the sense of analyzing, the sense of asking questions helps their minds to develop so that when they get into more formalized learning, they have a sense of expectation and how to respond in different situations. All of that is to say that these things help to contribute to the development of a healthy concept, a healthy sense of self. So in today's session, the idea is to focus on those elements of teaching that contributes to a child's appetite for wanting to know. Those elements of teaching that contributes to motivating your child. Those elements of teaching that helps to determine a sense of wanting to know. Remember, the world that these children are going to be living in will be very different from the world that you grew up in or the world that I grew up in. And they are going to be required to be proficient in reading, mathematics, the application of technology, critical thinking, the ability to be resourceful, the ability to be able to collaborate and to work with others who don't look like them. And they must be creative. And to be creative is to be one who solves problems. And that has to do with critical thinking and all the things that you are doing in terms of laying down the foundation for them. And it's a process, and on this journey, you will, as a parent, you hold your breath until you get to the end of the road. But I think these things that I make an effort to share with you in the podcast will help you in the process of parenting and helping to unfold that genius that's in our children. And I often follow up these comments in my newsletter. And the newsletter comes out on a monthly basis, and I'm beginning to get some feedback about the newsletter on my Facebook page. So what I am saying to you is that is to inform you, is to help you to engage in teaching your children, and to make you resourceful in the process of parenting. So with that, I'm going to invite you to visit my website, and there are books there that gives further clarity to the items that I've talked about. So until we meet next week, Chats with Baba. Have a good day.